Welcome to NJBIA's Stronger Together, a diversity and inclusion summit. We are pleased to bring an esteemed panel of leaders together to discuss unconscious bias in business. I'm June DePonte Sarnak, Dean of Lifelong Learning and co-chair of the President's Advisory Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Rowan College at Burlington County, and I'm your moderator for today's session. I'm so excited to have the privilege of kicking off this panel. I'd like to begin by introducing our panel for today's discussion. We are joined by Michelle Bajwa, co-founder of Domain Computer Services. Michelle?
Hi, June. Thank you for having us, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak out on this very important issue. My name is Michelle Bajwa. I'm a co-founder of Domain Computer Services. We founded the company about 24 years ago. I was a junior in undergrad at Rutgers University. Starting off my own company, so unconscious bias, I kind of dealt with for the first 10 years of my career as a young college student trying to make her way as an entrepreneur in the IT space. I, have many stories which I'll share with you later. Last year, Domain Computer Services was recapitalized by private equity funding. And so we changed our name to Domain Technology Partners to include more managed service providers in the IT space nationally. So I've exited from Domain Computer Services, and I'm currently working as the vice president of bizratings.com/360score.me, which is an online reputation management and client CSAT tool. So it works with online surveys and syndicating great reviews across the internet. And 360score.me is a 360-degree peer-to-peer sort of inter-office survey tool. And so that's what I do.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We're also joined by Susan Metz from Stevens Institute of Technology. Susan?
Thanks, June. Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Metz. I'm the Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. I'm under the Office of the President. I'm also a co-founder of WEPAN, the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, an educational organization that focuses on catalyzing change for women in engineering and the sciences. And I've spent my entire career in the space of underrepresented people in the STEM enterprise. So I look forward to being here today.
Thank you, Susan. And also Claude Richardson from Delta Dental is also joining us. Claude?
Thanks, June. Hi, everybody. Claude Richardson, as June said. I'm the Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Delta Dental. We are a 50-year-old dental insurance provider, the state's largest insurance provider. We focus on promoting oral health and giving back to our community. We have about 300 employees, and I'm looking forward to having this dialogue with you all today.
Thank you, Claude. Complete bios for panelists can be found in the speakers section of our event webpage. So welcome, everyone. According to a New York Post article, first impressions are important, but you may not know just how little time you have to actually make one. Within the first 7 seconds of meeting, people will have a solid impression of who you are, and in a study among 2,000 Americans examining the art of first impressions, they found that 7 in 10 Americans, about 69%, form a first impression of someone before they even speak. Our topic today of unconscious bias plays a vital role in our thoughts in those brief seconds. Everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various individuals and groups defined by topics such as age, gender, race, generation, and even geography. Biases are learned, stereotypes that are automatic, unintentional, deeply ingrained within our beliefs, and are universal. They also have the ability to affect our behavior. While the unconscious bias may seem innocent, problems can arise when unconscious biases make their way into workplaces. Can each of you share your experiences personally or professionally with unconscious bias and the impression it made on you?
Sure, if you don't mind, I can start.
Sure, thank you, Claude.
So let me start with personal. what I hear in the workplace often, and as the HR leader, we're often working with hiring managers about diversifying the workforce. So when an opening comes up, that's an opportunity, right? So that's an opportunity to change the workforce. And so we have a dialogue around where we're going to recruit so we can be sure that we cast the widest net possible to get as many candidates of different backgrounds as possible. And what I often hear is managers say, well, I'm open to hiring diverse candidates as long as they're qualified. Mm-hmm. So what's the unconscious bias there? That diverse candidates are not qualified, right? So the dialogue that I have to have with them is you have a job description, and in that job description, you talk about requisite skills, knowledge, and abilities, and even education. And all the candidates we're going to give you will meet that criteria. So they will all be qualified. I've heard that comment not only from folks who are not minorities, but I've also heard it from minorities. And I think when you hear that type of dialogue from minorities, I get where they're coming from. They're coming from, listen, if we're going to bring more people of color in here, they're going to have more scrutiny, or more women, they're going to have more scrutiny. We need to make sure they have the credentials that will give them credibility. I understand that. But when they express that desire as, they need to be qualified, what they do is they give license to everyone else to question the qualities and the credentials of people who are of diverse backgrounds. Let me give you another example. I was a staffing manager, this is many years ago, at a company you would recognize, a big company. And we had, because of new product launches and retirements, we had an opportunity to have a number of hires in the engineering ranks. And we wanted to diversify the engineering ranks because we didn't have a lot of people of color or a lot of representation in both genders. So what we did was we started recruiting, we cast a wide net. And after the first 5 offers went out, what I noticed was we didn't get any diverse candidates to accept our offers, even though some of the positions, the primary and the secondary candidate was diverse. So when I spreadsheeted the offers, right, just took the details of each offer and put them in a spreadsheet, it jumped out at me that all the candidates who were white males got sign-on bonuses and got enhanced vacation. All the candidates who were minority or female, they didn't get those. So when I called up the hiring managers and talked about this, they simply said, well, those candidates negotiated both, right? They negotiated the sign-on and they negotiated the extra vacation. And so, that's really when I learned, I was just coming out of the military into the workplace. That's when I really learned some of the dramatic differences in our workforce, right? Women and minorities are not always comfortable with negotiating such things. However, when the company didn't come forth with it, they just went to another offer that they had that didn't provide those things. So long story short, what that did was that led to HR having a lot more say in providing some guidance around who got what, and instead of leaving it to the individual candidates to negotiate those things, because it was starting to reflect in some unfairness. And what we saw was when the women and minorities got similar offers, and this was in engineering ranks, right, where folks tend to argue that women and minorities are underrepresented. What we found was when we equalized the offers, more than 40% of the new hires were diverse candidates.
My perspective is over decades long, actually, and from a different point of view. I was introduced to unconscious bias before the term was even coined. And, Stevens admitted women in 1971 into their undergraduate school, similar to many other universities in the country at that time. And in fact, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary of women at Stevens matriculating at the undergraduate level. I was at Stevens in the 80s, and one of our goals was to increase the number of women in STEM. We're primarily STEM-based university. And when I would go to listen to guidance counselors or high school teachers talking about their students, they would say, if a girl is good in math and science, teaching, being a math teacher, a science teacher, a nurse, that's something they automatically considered. And if a boy was interested in, had the same tools of math and science, they would steer him to be an engineer or a doctor. So it was the mindset of educators, very well-meaning people, who had this automatic reaction to steer girls in one direction and boys in another. And that has incredible impact, down the road. Thankfully, we've shifted that mindset. But that was, an interesting beginning.
I would absolutely agree with that. It's so interesting to connect both Susan and Claude's comments. I've experienced unconscious bias probably my entire life. And so I connect with it very personally. It's not only being the recipient of it, but also, unfortunately, buying into that through media, through your family structure. It's pervasive. It's constant. These belief systems that are instilled in us socially to kind of be almost a defense mechanism for others, where they can, you have 7 seconds to make your first impression. So we're all very busy people. And if you see a room of people, you're trying to categorize people very quickly so you can respond and react. So what's very interesting is in the IT industry, we are unfortunately very male dominated right now. And we're all working toward equalizing and, sort of getting a better representation of diversity in our industry. However, 24 years ago, it was hard for a female it wasn't so much even just gaining entrance into the IT world. It wasn't that, it was surviving in it. And so what happens is you graduate from a prestigious institution such as Stevens. Then you get into a corporate atmosphere such as Delta Dental, right? And then you get there and you look around to your left, right, upstairs, downstairs, it's all male. And so what happens is, being you're a minority in that situation, and to survive in that culture without allyship, without a mentor who's aware of unconscious bias, your survival rate in that situation plummets. And so I went to an all-female college. I went to Douglas College, which was like, the little women's college within the larger Rutgers University. And there I really was able to cultivate the concept of gender equity, what the history of women's rights was. And I came out punching. When I graduated, I was like, I'm ready. I'm gonna take on the world. And then I started my own company. And then I get into, I'm a consultant, I'm in and out of different corporate atmospheres. And it was very hard to overcome the bias of being female, and then also belief systems around being Asian. And so to pave my own path when people were already laying down the bricks for me was difficult. It was difficult. And it took a lot of self-awareness, education, and actually a very clear understanding that when you're at the top of an org chart, it's incumbent upon those leaders to sort of to very much instill awareness of the biases that they're perpetuating. And I think that in the IT industry, that was lacking for a long time. So in that respect, I feel very connected to this subject. A few things that I've read that have helped expand my knowledge and understanding of, Claude, you mentioned something about how minorities and women don't naturally have that confidence to bargain, to negotiate, especially when they're beginning. They very traditionally haven't asked for promotions. And so I really got a good understanding of that by reading The Confidence Code by Katty Kay, and I think it's Claire Shipman. I was just looking it up. So that was actually a very eye-opening read. And then to couple that with the recent BLM movement and understanding, I've been reading Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. The concept of you don't have to be blind to difference. I think it's impossible for us as human beings to be blind to difference, but it's exactly what Claude had mentioned. Why do you have to indicate or assume that certain groups of people will have a certain set of characteristics? that I think is the most toxic judgment that we as a society constantly purvey. So yeah, it's something that I connect with very deeply.
You
Well,
know,
I don't know if Michelle, you and Susan will resonate with this. And June, please feel free to jump in as well. When I did that analysis on, the differences in the offers, right? One thing that went through my mind is, it wasn't really just because one group negotiated or another, or what's really behind it, right? Because I've been fortunate in my career, I've worked for some quality organizations, all the best at what they do. I really don't think managers get up in the morning with the intent to discriminate.
No.
But, in HR, we have access to organizational-wide data, right? And every organization I've worked for, if you peel back the layers of the onion and you look at, just two comparisons, right? Women versus men, minorities versus non-minorities, and you just look at, average pay overall, average pay within their departments, and average pay by level, there are unexplained discrepancies, right? So if it's not intentional, what's driving that? I think it's unconscious biases. And I think we all come to the workplace with unconscious biases because of our experiences and our observations. But the key, right, Michelle, where I think you were headed, is the key is what we do about those so that we can level the playing field and make sure that everybody has a great opportunity, because we tend to believe at Delta Dental that talent is equally distributed. And by that, we mean talented people come from all walks of life, right? Whether they're taller, smaller, older, younger, male, female, et cetera.
Right.
And so if they don't see, equitable practices, particularly if they don't see people that look like them throughout the organization and higher up, they're not going to stay around to see if things will be different for them.
Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And that's fantastic. And I thank all of you for sharing that. And that really does lead us to our next topic. We all come from, it's an extremely important conversation to have. And the business setting is really looking at this as a new way to look at how they interact, not only with their employees, but with clients and customers and students. Each of you represent top industries, from business and healthcare to higher education. So Susan and I both come from a higher education environment where we know that our students are going through some of these same types of things that your clients are going through and your employees are going through. My senior year of high school, my guidance counselor told me I wasn't college material because I'm multiracial and a woman, and I should learn to type and go into a secretarial pool. Clearly that wasn't my path and my destiny, but that unconscious bias played a role in who I am today. And I know we started talking about this, but I wanted to segue into knowing from your business perspective, can you give other examples? I know Claude did a great job in talking about his experience in this. How unconscious bias has played a role in the industries that you work in? So anywhere from enrollment, maybe on the student side, to hiring and advancement practices, some things that you've seen really specific to your industries.
One thing I'd like to address is this idea of confidence or lack of confidence among women and underrepresented minorities. They walk a very fine line. It doesn't always have to do with confidence. The research says that, these folks who are minorities in the STEM enterprise need to be likable. And when you start negotiating, there's a risk you're taking that supervisor, that potential boss, will question your likability, because that also is unconscious bias. Yeah. That a woman who negotiates is not as likable as a white man who negotiates. So again, it's not as straightforward as a lack of confidence. Just get women to negotiate. It can backfire. So there are risks. In terms of, June, your question that you just raised, I'm very focused on hiring faculty. Again, the STEM fields, women, Black and Hispanic people. There are fewer of them in the pipeline, but pipeline is really an excuse for not doing the work that needs to be done to identify them and hire them. And there's unconscious bias issues along the entire spectrum, from the actual job posting and the language that's used. It's common again, knowledge, and the research backs this up, that a man will read a job position, and if he meets 60% of the requirements, he'll apply for the job. A woman, on the other hand, needs to meet 100% of the requirements in her mind to feel like she is a qualified applicant.
Yeah.
And again, that has less to do with confidence than it has to do with, if this is what they're looking for, I'm not going to waste my time and apply for a job when, I have other things to do and other opportunities to pursue. So I coach our hiring teams as far as looking at that language and making sure that the language reflects the job, that it's broad enough to attract people from many different fields. And then it translates into, what does the search committee look like? It needs to be well thought out. I'll let my colleagues speak to that, but along the way, every single juncture of a search process, there are minefields and pitfalls that have to be dealt with when it comes to unconscious bias.
Yeah, I absolutely can, that the likability piece is very important. It's a very important point to make. I think that's great. I think that women and minorities have a tendency to understand that they can be perceived as aggressive or angry, or like, wow, that, she's like really in a bad mood today. I wonder what's up with her, whereas if there was a white male, that was just, oh, that's just, he's a fighter. He's just, really outspoken. And I think that that's internalized by a lot of minorities and women. And then we are afraid to speak up because we are people pleasers, or we know that we'll find success faster, or I don't know.
Or there's backlash. Or there's
backlash. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So to that vein, I will say that when I coach my staff, especially the females, the issue isn't so much the work. The work itself comes very easily, not easily to them, but as easily as it would to anyone else. The work itself is not challenging. The issue is when you go into the break room, when you're sitting around and you're sort of collaborating, and Tony Hsieh from Zappos used to say serendipitous interactions. So we were just kind of walking around the office, well, back when we were not in Zoom, in the virtual world. A lot of the females would come up to me and say, I just don't have anything in common with anyone I work with. And so in our society, we spend more time with our work families than we do our regular families, our families and friends. And so what happens is, if you can't have a connection with the people you're working with, that workplace becomes not as enjoyable or fulfilling. And so I address that with them often. I think that what happens is, when you're in the break room, even when you're just chatting on Zoom before and after a meeting, if it's one homogenous group, they're going to have homogenous interests. They're going to have homogenous stories. They're going to have homogenous experiences that led up to this moment. And so to speak up and say, oh, I'm not into X, Y, or Z, they're just going to look at you like, what? Who is this person? Like, why? Where did they pull that person out of, right? So I think that when it comes to decision making as well, if you have those homogenous experiences, how can you make well-advised decisions that cover the gamut of what we are all, what our goals are? And so I talk to them. I talk to women about finding an entryway for conversation, not hiding their diverse experience. And I talk to minorities about that too. And you have to coach the majority of the group to be accepting of that, and how their comments can be perceived as xenophobic or isolationist, and in terms of making other people feel like they're, don't belong. And I have a very sort of visceral example of how, this came to fruition for me in a very early part of my career. So I was about maybe 20 years old, and we had a job where we would be the IT support team for a shipping company. And so these ships, it's the big, the ones that come out of Port Newark, the big shipping containers, they would be out to sea for 4 or 5 months at a time. And so they would then come into Port Elizabeth, Port Elizabeth, and then they would, pay by the minute to unload. And so we would go, and at that time we were a team of 4, 3 men and me, and we would, basically troubleshoot, deal with all their PC issues, check out network cables, get under their desks and, deal with all the PCs and all that stuff. And I got onto the ship and I was so naive. I did it. All the ships are, they're all men, so you get there and it was like a slap in the face. The culture was so, I hate to say, it was just so misogynistic. So there's calendars of, pin-up things everywhere. They're looking at me like, whoa, 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 who just walked into the ship, right? It was just a female. They hadn't seen one in like 4 or 5 months or something. And I felt so unsafe, so unsafe. It wasn't the work. The work itself was fine. I just wanted to go in, get my job done and leave in a safe and be in a safe space. But I actually really resented the fact that I didn't feel safe. I was so upset that I am the owner of a company. I'm a successful woman, and yet I cannot feel safe. And so I think about that experience quite often, how I had to really stick up for myself. And, one of the mates I went into their quarters and they were having a problem with their machine. So I had to plug something back in or whatever. And I'm 20 years old and he offered me a drink. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's like 11 o'clock in the morning. What is happening here? And so to be blindsided by all of these comments or, attention that is completely not congruent with what your purpose there is, I think that people experience that often. Mm. And so I think about that space that I was in. And I when I see someone who seems like, they don't have anything in common or they're struggling, I think about how uncomfortable I was. And that really connects me to that person. And just sort of like, what can I do? How did you perceive that comment? How did you, even though to us, it may just seem harmless. So unconscious bias right there.
I love your example of Zappos. I know that in reading about their company and their culture and their climate, they said that even when someone's interviewing, the interview begins when they pick them up from the airport in the van that comes directly to their headquarters, because if someone is interactive with the driver, they feel like they will probably interview well because they're open and they're inquisitive. So their interviewing structure really starts early.
Yeah, interesting.
What else have you seen? Because I know that statistically, building a diverse workplace is attributed with anything from higher employee retention to increased profits. So in your business, have you seen some of the other areas that you've looked at to build an equity-minded environment through improvements with implicit bias?
Yeah, well, what I have seen is my experience, right? When I net down unconscious bias, what it really results in is who has influence in the organization and who doesn't. And influence is key, right? Because that determines who gets promoted. That determines, who makes the key decisions and often determines pay decisions. And so you see it start, just in a conference room. To Michelle's point, if you're the only one that's different, you could put forth an idea and people will blow past it almost as if you didn't speak. Then all of a sudden you feel like you're in a twilight zone because a few minutes go by and somebody says the exact same thing you said. But because they have more influence in the organization or more accepted in the organization, it comes across as the best thing since sliced bread. And, it doesn't take too long for that to happen to you more than once before you get a strong message, right, of what comes from you, how it's viewed, and what kind of influence and what kind of future you have in the organization. So some of the things we try to do is, one, take a look at the data, as I was telling you about, right? Every organization has some sort of year-end performance review merit process, right? So if you were to ask me, do we have bias? I really can't answer that question until I do some sort of analysis, right? If I look at the overall average of increases for males versus females or minorities compared to non-minorities, And then if I were to look at it by level and within their departments, I could then begin to understand, do we have discrepancies and where do I need to, take some action to fix it? I think the other thing that we try to introduce is transparency. And you see that Susan was talking about in interview panels, right? Where you're not just the hiring manager interviews, but a group of people interview. So that when you debrief on the different candidates, and I do see this, right? Somebody will talk glowingly about a candidate. And when you kind of peel the onions because they resonated with something in the background, we went to the same school, we were in the same fraternity or whatever. But another group of peers are like, well, wait a minute, what about this candidate? Because they brought this, that, and the other to the table. We also do that with a non-block process for talent management. It's basically, in short, it compares performance with potential, right? Each is looked at in low, mid to high, so that gives you the 9 blocks. So in order to put somebody's name into a block, a manager has to talk to their peer group as to, here's why I think Claude belongs in this block versus that block. And then they get feedback from, well, that doesn't line up with my experiences with him, or it does line up with my experiences with him. And what we find is you then get more of a calibration, right? Before I may have been able to get by just because of my Rutgers connection with Michelle, or maybe that worked against me if she went to a different type of school. But now that she has to present right in front of her peers, she takes a more critical view at what does the individual really bring to the table. So I think data and transparency are probably the 2 biggest tools that I've used to try to, mitigate the impacts of unconscious bias so that we get more of a diverse workforce, that we have more of a meritocracy where people who do well get the lion's share of the rewards and the promotions, et cetera, et cetera.
Just responding to both Michelle and Claude. Michelle, in your discussion about being the only woman in that awkward situation, I think we have to differentiate between hostile climate and unconscious bias. Yeah. So I think you were experiencing a hostile climate.
Right.
In terms of Claude, your discussion about data and transparency so resonates with me. I think we need consistency in the interview process. You treat all the people who are applying for a position the same, you ask them the same questions, you measure that against actual criteria that you have. Whenever an organization talks about fit, cultural fit, that is a danger sign for unconscious bias, because people, and it's so natural for human beings to want to hire people just like them. It's a comfort factor, and that does not serve the organization best. And that reeks of unconscious bias. There's such amazing research out there that proves this time and time again, beginning with blind auditions in orchestras. In 2000, a couple of economists actually did a study. And, why are all the first chairs of symphonies men, and often Asian men? Well, there's a bias when people walk across the stage, you look at them, you automatically have a reaction, and that's when the bias begins. So the study had people play a musical piece behind a screen. So you had no idea who was playing. All you heard was the beautiful music that was emanating from the violins. And when that happened, there was a 50% increase that women were advanced to the next round. That is incredible. That's such evidence. Moss Rakusin did a study in 2012, looked at the identical resumes and put a male's name on one and a female's name on the other. And males were hired a significant amount of the time versus the women, or offered a position with a greater salary, with mentoring options, the identical resume. And these studies have been repeated again and again. If you have a Black person's sounding name versus a white person's name, the white people get the callbacks, the Black people do not. Again, the identical resumes. So the research is profuse, it's rigorous, and it's shocking.
You see that a lot in the C-suite. And we have a lot of conversations with executives that are trying to diversify the C-suite, and some of them do that by diversifying their board of directors. When we ask for feedback, it comes also to what that company culture is in their marketing. So do you have any examples of how businesses could market better? Maybe their websites have their own unconscious bias, so it doesn't give a true depiction of what their culture, their climate is. And even some of the things that it is leading or misleading about their environments that they could work in as well. Have you seen that?
I will say though, I think there has to be an intentionality behind identifying your culture as just not the traditional sense. So in our organization, we have defined our culture based on core values. And they're not, it's not, you know, you have to look like us. Definitely not. It is having empathy. It's sweating the details. I mean, you know, it's all of our, you know, 5 or 6 core values, you know, esprit de corps, things like that. So again, to touch on Claude's point about a meritocracy. So our culture is significantly, you know, rooted in those core values that talk about traits, merit, you know, your abilities to, be compassionate and be, you know, a team player, things like that. In terms of dealing with the unconscious bias in the hiring process is harder I find in smaller companies, smaller to medium-sized companies where they don't have, you know, people as educated and wonderful as Claude and as studied as Susan. So I think to talk to people about accountability as they look through these resumes, are you making any, you know, particular judgments based on just that name thing? It happens all the time. I actually have a very close family member that had a very South Asian sounding name and then wasn't getting any offers and then changed the name to something very sort of anglicized and got the same exact resume, no changes, just the name, and started getting job offers or interviews within a week. So that was a little, you know, social experiment right there. But it is right. It's scary. It's deep. It's toxic. So yeah, I just wanted to jump on that point about redefining one's culture.
And are you seeing that you're rewriting job descriptions as well to expand upon experience levels that can be a bit more inclusive, maybe things that an individual has done in their church or their community that gives you the same level of detail in their performance, but might not have been in a corporate or a business setting?
Yeah, for sure. We always consider a candidate holistically. And we also in our, you know, everyone's going to look at our career page or about us. We are very intentional about showing that we value diversity, we respect all different types of experiences, and we feel that that adds to our ability to deliver on, you know, on our goals. And so I think that just being accountable as an organization to those goals is the first step in sort of being more accepting of, you know, people who may not necessarily reach out. We also start at a grassroots level too, with community colleges. We have a program called Apprentice IT, where we actually work with college professors and talk about, you know, okay, so tell us who your students are. Who do you feel would be, you know, has a great, you know, potential and, you know, for getting into a career in our organization. And a lot of them we find have issues with, again, just the ability to be assertive because they're young in their careers, but also just have general social anxiety about how to handle that transition from higher education over into the corporate world. So we really work to coach them and to set expectations. And it actually keeps us very accountable as leaders because we prefer to, you know, hire from those programs versus, you know, and we want to cultivate our local talent. So that's been something that we've really had a lot of success with. And so that particular program has allowed our organization to go up from like maybe 5 or 10% female back in, 20 years ago. So now we're coming up on 35 to 40% on females in our organization, which is huge for us.
That's fantastic. So we've covered a lot of information today, but I was hoping that I could also ask what suggestions you might offer to how to, on how to mitigate bias in the workplace, and maybe some examples of trainings or other resources that you might have used within your environments that might be helpful to our other audience members that are listening today.
We've done a lot of unconscious bias training with, primarily with our faculty, doing extensive workshops, doing interactive theater, because, it's one thing you can see a good video, you can participate in a workshop until you really feel what's going on, until you're mindful of what's going on. These one and done things don't work particularly well. So it has to be a consistent discussion, training, and over time. These are not overnight fixes, but we have seen amazing changes, but we have to keep at it. The unconscious bias workshops we do, particularly with the interactive theater, when you see scenarios played out, and then the facilitator entertains questions and probes the audience about how they're feeling about it. That seems to be particularly effective. And then having someone serve on a search committee who is kind of watching out for these things, because we all fall back into patterns and our old patterns. So someone has to pay attention to bring you out of those patterns. And I have to say, the Stevens community, there's no resistance to this. People want to solve this issue. People do not want to have unconscious bias. So everyone is really on board. It's just a need to be consistent over time. And then the conversation shifts and you hear unlikely people bringing up these things you've never heard before. Just to conclude with one example, when we're hiring faculty, often a department will look at the school that they came from, right? And people get excited when they see Stanford and Berkeley and MIT and all these fancy schools. And they're quite prestigious. However, if you want to hire Black and Hispanic people, those Black and Hispanic people who've attended these schools are wanted by everyone. They are in such unbelievable demand. And there are few of those people who go to these very elite schools for a very good reason. They are not necessarily a comfortable place for minority people to attend. So they may gravitate to Howard University, for instance, or minority serving institutions, because that's where they build their worth and their confidence and their communities and their mentors, so that when they get to the search committees, you have to stop this elitism and looking at just these cadre of a small group of schools, and look at these stellar people who have gone to amazing universities who are not in the top 5, for instance. You draw amazing talent when you broaden your reach beyond the glitz of, the Ivy League.
What I have found when it comes to mitigating unconscious bias is I like to look at it into 2 categories: awareness and action, because you need to take some actions to kind of undo it, right? And to make sure that it doesn't keep occurring. When you take a spreadsheet and you look at the promotions that happened last year, and you just break out the demographics of that, what percent were males and what percent were, minorities, females, et cetera. And you just publish that to, say, a group, me being in HR, right? I can publish that to a group of managers. The data speaks for itself, and what you find is a visceral reaction, right? When people look at that, they want to be better than that. And so then all we have to do as the HR team is provide them with, hey, here's some things we can do. So for example, if you've got a job opening, one of the best practices we can have is you as a hiring manager should have an arm's length distance between you and the resumes that you review. So we will, based on your job description, we HR will review the resumes and we will pass what we think are the best qualified candidates on to you. So then you as a manager, you don't even have a chance yet to incorporate your biases into who gets selected for, the interviews. So just practices like that, I think, could help. Other actions, I think, organizations who aren't looking at every year, if you're passing out promotions, raises, things like that, if you're not looking at the demographics of that, you don't know if you have biases or not, right? And so then you might be missing opportunities where you can help to offset that. And then again, I'm a big fan of transparency. Managers having to justify to a peer group people they want to promote, people they want to give increases to, people they want to hire. It really kind of levels the playing field and helps bring about an organization with a much more diverse workforce, which then gives you an organization, because diverse backgrounds, right, often lead to better business solutions. It helps you to stay relevant in your space. And that's what it's all about, right? Not only what you can do today, but being relevant tomorrow to your customer base.
Well, I'm learning so much from Claude and Susan. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to sit alongside you as a panelist. Oh my goodness. I have so many new things I'm going to try. I will tell you, one thing we do with our leadership, I think it starts from the top. And so we actually subscribe to this leadership philosophy called Radical Candor, and it's by Kim Scott. She actually developed it when she was working for Google under Sheryl Sandberg. I think it was Google. I may be misspeaking, but anyhow, she started her own organization. And what it does is it proposes that as a leader, you challenge directly, but also care personally and indicate to those you are working with that you care for them personally. And so what happens is that you don't end up sort of hiding any criticism or feedback through passive aggressiveness, which is what she calls ruinous empathy. So she's actually since then, taken back that she would have named this philosophy radical candor, but rather compassionate candor. So we practice compassionate candor at Domain. And so what happens is through our anonymous 360 reviews, we understand and get a constant data on what our staff experience is through all levels of the org chart. And then what we do is we use compassionate candor to have real transparency within the organization. And that leads to accountability of those leaders. And it's a constant dialogue. Our work toward addressing unconscious bias and just pervasive prejudices and racism in general our work is never done. There's always going to be, it's a constant landscape that changes, especially with, political and social environments and everything that's going on. So it's a constant conversation, but we do find that getting the leadership on the same page in terms of how we give feedback and how we receive it really helps, sort of get us speaking the same language in that way. So I would highly suggest that people pick up Radical Candor. It's actually, there's a website too that, podcasts and everything. It's a very simple concept, but it's profound.
Yeah, thank you so much for those suggestions. Our institution started a book club, and right now we're reading the Racial Healing Handbook by Dr. Annalise Singh, and that gives different perspectives. It's really a workbook and a journal. So we actually meet monthly and we cover several chapters each month, and we have an open discussion, and we've set aside norms of making sure that we give and get grace and we appreciate everybody's opinions, because we know some of the conversations are not easy when we're trying to redefine what we think about certain environments and certain groups. We're able to open that dialogue up very nicely with that book. And another suggestion that I really reflect on a lot is Leading with Cultural Intelligence by David Livermore, because I find that gives us another aspect of looking at culture from a few different perspectives, geography, and not just racial or not just gender, but even gender takes on multiple different forms that are really giving us a different way to perceive things. And I think a lot of those things are fantastic for us to look at. And it really improves, like we said, everybody has unconscious bias within their backgrounds, but it helps us to be able to use that cultural intelligence really to be able to share with everyone a little bit more knowledge and experience, and to get that fantastic workspace. I also wanted to circle back something that everybody mentioned, and get your thoughts on what do you think of mentoring as a way also to help an environment alleviate or mitigate some of the bias in the workplace?
Yeah, I think mentoring is key. I still to this day have mentors. I call them my personal board of directors. And I got to be honest with you, I'm not always happy when they call me and they're telling me things I should be doing and why haven't you done this? But, I know they're coming from a place of they care, right? And I've been working with them for more than a decade at this point. But I think the trick with mentors, or I should say the key rather, is there's got to be a good connection between the mentor and the mentee. So what I have found is organizations that try to, launch a mentor program and assign mentors, it's not always successful because for whatever reason, there's not a good dynamic with the relationship. But, if you're going to try to launch a mentor program and you get some volunteers who want to be a mentor and you put up like a biography of each person on a website, say, and then those who want to be mentored can go select their mentor, what you find is a higher degree of resonance between the two of them and the relationships tend to endure. But then I think the second piece to that is not all mentors are created equally. So I've been in organizations where we put kind of a guide to mentoring together, right? For the mentor, here's some things that will help you be a better mentor. And then a similar guide together for the mentee, right? Here's some things that'll help you get the most out of this relationship. And then I think when you put those two things together where the mentee can select and then each person gets some sort of guidelines, right? Guardrails of how to be good at this. It can be highly successful, but I'm a fan because I think it's made a difference in my career.
I like Claude, what you're saying about mentoring, particularly that you're using the plural. That's the one thing I really recommend, particularly to faculty and students as well. Not the idea that a mentor would be the guru, just doesn't work. You need a pool, multiple mentors for different things. And oftentimes too, when you parse it out that way, the burden on any particular mentor is not so great. They don't feel like they have your career and life in their hands. So you might find someone who's a sponsor for certain introductions and other to support, different types of work. So multiple mentors is an important way to go. And if a relationship sours, you have some other people to rely on. I also just wanted to recommend one more book, The Inclusive Academy by Virginia Valian and Abby Stewart. I've also given that as presents to our deans and department chairs, and we talk about chapters often.
Mentorship is systematized in our process here at Domain. We have apprentices. We have Apprentice IT, which is run by mentors. And I believe that plural is also very much an advantage that I would suggest to everybody. One person cannot just their experience isn't going to be, speaking of diversity, diverse enough to handle all the diversity of one's experience, so to speak. So we always encourage our apprentices to reach out to there's no ownership in that way. There's just a group of mentors that are available to you. And again, the conversation is constant. And we keep ourselves accountable by, again, just being very data driven through our review process. Every week we touch base with them. How was this week? What was going on? What were your strong points? What were points where you felt like you could have used some help? We talk about, again, very holistically their experience. We don't just bring it down to their technical skills. We talk about the issues that they had personally with any other of their teammates or coworkers, and also with other mentors. We have to keep ourselves accountable too. we've really recognized that the position of a mentor is one of authority. And so we have to be triply, double, like just so conscious of the words that are coming out of our mouths. And so we have to be conscious of our gestures, of our, anything, even if our personal experience to get us into that seat was tough that day, we can't like sort of emote to them about it, because they may think it was something they did to, sort of incite that reaction from us. So just being mindful of how we're being perceived. Again, like just to quote Kim Scott, she always says, feedback in conversation is not measured at someone's mouth, but at the listener's ear. And so we really always talk about that. Think about who you're speaking to, where they are in terms of communication. Are they introverted, extroverted, things like that. And it helps keep that conversation moving in a positive direction.
Well, I can't thank all of you enough for this fantastic conversation. Thank you for your time and your dedication to such an important topic. These open conversations are meaningful to promote equity and understanding, and giving us the opportunity to be able to be stronger together. So I'd like to thank all of you, all of our panelists, Michelle Bajwa of Domain Computer Services, Susan Metz of Stevens Institute of Technology, and Claude Richardson of Delta Dental. And of course, a big thank you to all of you out there for attending this panel. We hope to see you at the next one soon. So until next time, I'm June DePonte Cernak with Rowan College of Burlington County. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon and wishing you all a great day. Thank you.